before we start talking about that, I want to talk about what the problem is, and I want to present it in a way that hopefully makes better sense than just socialists and liberals and Democrats. I find that way of thinking dumb. I find that way of thinking short.
Jarrin Jackson is a Christian combat veteran, business owner, and family man. He entered military service because of 9/11 and graduated West Point in May 2008. As an infantry officer, he led over 500 soldiers over 2 deployments to Afghanistan. After being denied the authorization to engage enemy insurgents, he left the military and ran twice for U.S. Congress on a platform that stressed agile leadership for the rapidly changing 21st century. He owns and operates 2 franchise restaurants, enjoys wrestling with his boys, and doting on his daughter. Jarrin is committed to stopping socialism, which he believes is the way anti-Americanism is winning the fight for the hearts of young Americans. What a breath of fresh air. Please join me in welcoming Jarrin Jackson.
My name is Jarrin Jackson, and I love America. Thank you for having me this evening. I want to talk about something I've never talked about in a way that I don't think I've ever heard said out loud. So I'm going to make a statement and say that you've never heard it spoken about in this way. There's really no other way to talk about it. So I don't want to age discriminate here. But who here identifies as older than 33 years old? Okay. Does anyone here identify as younger than 33 years old? Okay, one person. Okay. Some jokes. I am straddling a generational chasm. I'm an older millennial. I am a millennial, but I'm an older millennial. I was born in 1985. I actually turned 34 this month. So I'm getting, that much closer to not seeing my Social Security. I have traditional values. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. I believe that the Constitution is the greatest governing political document in the history of the world. I'm also young enough to recognize that traditional values sound stupid to people my age. So I am on a generational chasm, if you can imagine, 1 foot on one side and 1 foot on the other side. My heart and my mind belong to those generations, those giants upon whose shoulders I'm standing. I recognize that, I value that, I honor that, I'm thankful and grateful for that. While at the other side, I recognize that I have 3 children growing up in an anti-American, anti-Christ, gender fluid, morally mobile, openly hostile way of life. Amen. So what do I do about that? Right. That's number 1 of my solutions. Don't jump the gun now. You're right, prayer. And I don't need my outline anymore. Y'all have the answers, so I don't need to be up here. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. I want to apply a way of thinking that I've developed in my life. I spent almost 2 years of my life fighting an insurgency in Afghanistan. And for those of you who don't really understand the context of an insurgency is a military opposition that is standing in direct contrast to military superiority. So, there's a scene, I hope you all have seen this movie, about 20 years ago. There was a Mel Gibson movie that's depicting the American Revolution. And Mel Gibson's character is standing on the 2nd floor of this house with his son. And these 2 guys are sitting here watching this field. And in this field, you've got the British on this side and the colonial Continental Army over here. And it's an open field, and they go right at each other. And the British win. The British just destroy the Americans. And Mel Gibson's character says something along the lines of going toe-to-toe in open field with British redcoats is just madness. And as long as the Americans continue to fight in open field, toe-to-toe against the British redcoats, they lost. So the story was they fought an insurgent in a guerrilla war, and hey, America, okay? And there's some truth to that. I won't get too technical. My high school history teacher is here, by the way. So I want to make sure that I have some historical grounding and I don't just pull things out of nowhere. But I want to apply a way of thinking that I learned after getting blown up a few times. After realizing that the world is not American, the world is not Christian, the world doesn't think rationally, the world doesn't really care what I want, okay? So I'm going to cut tonight. I'm going to cut. And when I say that, I mean I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be truthful. I'm trying to pull back a layer and get us to recognize what the core issue is, because it's only after a proper diagnosis can we really approach a good treatment. Okay? So that's the way I'm going. I'm also not a candidate. I'm not running for office. So I have no ambitions other than the fact that I love my country. So I don't care what you think about me. I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm not going to ask you for a vote. I'm not going to ask you for nothing. I'm going to speak what's on my heart, observations that I have. At the very end, I want to make sure that we have some back and forth, because I think that what I'm going to present tonight has the ability to speak to older generations, that includes y'all, and then it also has utility for addressing the rising generations. First Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Jay, said that one of the responsibilities, one of the duties of Americans, one of the duties of a citizen is to teach the rising generations the value of freedom. Okay? That's something that we all have. That's something that we are failing at. We're failing at. Okay? And so one of the things I'm going to talk about today is how to address that. But before we talk about the solutions, which I have a young gentleman in the back that has already identified the most important thing, to pray. Before we start talking about that, I want to talk about what the problem is, and I want to present it in a way that hopefully makes better sense than just socialists and liberals and Democrats. I find that way of thinking dumb. I find that way of thinking short. I understand the utility of identifying an enemy. I want to understand my enemy. I want to understand where he goes to the bathroom, where he eats, where he sleeps, how he walks, how he moves, how he thinks, how he judges what's right, what's wrong, what are his priorities. I want to understand what his resources are, what his objectives are. In a fight, what is his reaction? What are his trained objectives? How does he respond to friction and tension? What happens whenever I drop a drone versus whenever I shoot him with the rifle? I want to know the differences. So if we just broad brushstroke everybody that is against us, we're not really understanding who is against us. So with that, I'll start. That was a long intro. But hopefully this goes faster. If I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. If I'm going too slow, do one of these things. I was on the Pat Campbell show. Was it what day is it? I was on it yesterday, and I was in the middle of a point, and I'll get rolling. I'll get talking, and Pat just looks at me and he goes like this, and it completely threw me off. And I was like, whoa, okay, I got to shut up. So if you do that, I will quickly speed up, but you might. I might lose something at that point. But if I'm looking down, then I won't see you, and we'll just go. So my objective is to be over as soon as I can, because I do want feedback. I do want wisdom, and I expect it. So think through, the years and the wealth and the knowledge that you have, and please apply it, because this is the first step that I've taken in this effort to kill socialism in this country in the 21st century, okay? So this is the first time I've ever really talked about it in this deliberate of a method.
Remember us. Just remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got it all dated, and we've got, the camera here to give a record. I've said some of this stuff on Pat's show, but never like this, because there's commercial breaks, because Triad Services has to advertise and interrupt airtime. So the first thing I'll start off with was during my first deployment, I was 24 years old. I was an infantry officer. I was a lieutenant in charge of a platoon of about 20, 25 soldiers. And long story short, but we had this area locked down and we were searching a house. As we were searching this house, I was, tired, had just ran a long way. Again, long story. I was tired. So I sat down, I looked at my graphics because I wanted to make sure I was where I wanted to be. One of the jokes in the military is that you can't spell lost without LT. LT is an abbreviation for lieutenant. So I wanted to make sure I knew where I was. So as I'm checking my graphics, this Afghan kid walked up to me, 12, 13 years old, young kid, walked up to me, started speaking English. English speaking by a kid in Afghanistan is rare. If he knew English, then he's got access to resources, rich family, basically not dirt poor like everybody, all other Afghans. And so that piqued my interest and said, oh, wow, I don't know how to respond to someone who knows how to speak English here because it's not normal. He jumps into it and he says, let me ask you a question. Oh, okay. Hey, what's up? Sure. He goes, do you urinate on the Quran? Now, I don't mean to be brash, and I'm sorry for bringing this in here, but this is the true story. Do you urinate on the Quran? What? That's a dumb question. Before I could respond and answer him, he said, do you photograph women? That's an equally dumb question. Those are non sequiturs. I mean, like I'm breathing heavily. I'm tired. I'm focused on my mission. I've got all sorts of stuff going on in my head. I've got helicopters in the air. I'm calling back to my boss, and here's this kid asking me these basic questions from left field. And I go, I have no idea what you're talking about, kid. What do you mean? And he squats down like every Afghan, well, most Afghans, like most Afghans can, and he just asks these questions again. To shorten the story, he was trying to validate ideas that he believed to be true. He had been taught through his upbringing that Americans, the West, represents anti-Islam. We represent something that's against Islam. And because we represent America, because America represents anti-Islam, there are certain things that we do that are so grotesque and so evil and so bad and so unjust that that's the reason why people fight us. It's not because we're trying to give them prosperity or government or peace or anything like that. They're fighting us because we urinate on the Quran. They're fighting us because we photograph women. Now, all of these are obviously against teachings in the Quran. But this kid was trying to validate his own worldview by asking me. Now, of course, I represented the authority because I am a Westerner. I am an American. So he approached me, asked me in my language to affirm or deny the things that he had been told. And I am sometimes quick, sometimes I'm slow. It caught up to me what was happening in that moment. I understood in that moment, he is trying to affirm propaganda talking points. Now, a lot of the lessons I learned in Afghanistan, they don't come with a banner that says, point number 1, he's trying to do this. You've got to be streetwise. You've got to have some kind of, mental agility about you, or else, it's just in one ear and out the other. I was fortunate enough on this day to recognize that's what he was trying to do. And so I said, no, I don't. No, we don't. That's not something we do. In fact, we want to, make sure that we respect your religion. I disagree with it, but we want to respect your way of life. I don't want to tell you what to do. I want you to live your own life. I try to affirm and present him freedom. Instead of taking my perspective, he doubled down and he disagreed with me. So even with my testimony, face to face, my telling him, this is not true, you believe a lie, he didn't believe me. He doubled down and was committed to the way that he was brought up. And my lesson there is that it's impossible to kill an idea once it's taken root in your mind. It's impossible. You can't get it out. There's no way to kill an idea once it's taken root in a mind. Second one is you should not expect old heads on young shoulders. Let that one sink in. You shouldn't expect old heads, wisdom, to be on young shoulders. If someone's young and they're trying to affirm or deny a worldview, you might be fighting uphill. Correction, you will be fighting uphill. You're not gonna change their world with a well-placed scripture or with a well-placed truism, because as Christ said, they don't have ears to hear. They don't have a mind that is set to receive what you're trying to give them. Now, I'm setting things up here, okay? Another thing I'll say is what we believe controls how we behave. If you have a terrorist propaganda talking point embedded deep into your heart and your mind, then you will readily strap a bomb to your chest and walk up to some unassuming soldiers and push the button, because you get to go to eternity, and who cares what they do? They're going to go to hell. I realized in Afghanistan that I am at war with ideas. I'm not at war with a person. I'm at war with ideas, which I should have just looked to my Bible. The Bible says we don't fight against the flesh. We fight against powers and principalities. We fight against something that is more. And that's what's happening in this country. In fact, I won't say, see, I told you so, but the first time I ran for office, I came back saying, the stuff I saw in Afghanistan is coming here to America, which is not a sexy talking point. It's not build a wall, right? And don't get me wrong, I support Trump and I want the wall, but there's a difference between, pithy, quick talking point and truth. I need to get better at selling the truth, which is kind of what I'm trying to do here. So help me out. With that, so my point there is, with me to answer the questions, he ignored what I said and he chose his own bias, which takes me to my second point, which was there are minds with sand foundations. Remember that parable when Jesus talks about the wise and the foolish builders? The foolish man builds his house upon the sand, and the other guy builds his house upon the rock, and the rain came splat, right? So we know that. You know how it goes. I'm assuming some level of Christian competence in the room. We are in a church, right? We are in a church. Okay, so I'm assuming some competence in my audience. I will explain if there's anyone that wants me to explain, but I'll explain. But the idea there is that in Afghanistan, the roads are dry riverbeds. And where I was in Sabari was in a bowl, so mountains all around. So when the rains would come, you'd look at the weather and the rains would go, and you'd be like, man, this is going to be really bad in about a week. Because it took about a week for the watershed to filter. And then once the watershed filtered everything, it was literally a wall of water rushing down these, what were dry riverbeds used as roads became rivers. And people would build their mud-packed clay houses in the middle of this riverbed. And so every year, these monsoons would come and wipe these people out. It would kill people, it would cause destruction, and they would rebuild right where it was supposed to be. And so it was the first time in my life that parable took on a very real meaning. How stupid do you have to be to build in the path of a river where the monsoons are going to come? And and then to think that you see the water coming, it takes a week for the water to come. So if it rains, why don't you be like, hey, I'm going to go visit the people in the other province and then come back? But no, they're so stubborn that they stay there. I'm off script by now. They stay there and wait for the water to wipe them out and then go, whoa. Anyway. So my point here is that people my age and younger have dozens of incompatible worldviews dancing around in their head. They've got so many different incompatible, competing ideologies that they have no foundation. They've got a foundation of sand. So anything that they build upon those ideologies and those foundations will not stand. It won't stand. All we got to do is poke. All we got to do is really prick. And that I'll get to that in a second. But there's two ways that people generally look at the world. You've got a meta-narrative, and then you've got elements of understanding. A meta-narrative, there's 5 questions people generally ask. Who am I? Why am I here? What's wrong with the world? How to fix it? What about death? If you have a secular humanist worldview, those questions are really taunting. Those questions are very scary because you don't really know the answer. If you have a biblical worldview, man, I got that. Who am I? I'm a child of God. Why am I here? To glorify God. What's wrong with the world? Sin. How do I fix it? I don't. What about death? Believe in Jesus.
Amen.
That's simple, right? I'm biblically grounded with all those answers. But for millions of people my age and younger who don't have that worldview, these questions are the most powerful things that they think about. They might not acknowledge it, but it is. And I think there's opportunity there, and I'll get to there later. I'm hoping I'm building up some anticipation. If we talk about elements, if we talk about the elements of understanding, we're going to talk about 5 different things: God, man, truth, knowledge, and ethics. Everyone's got to take a position on God. To the atheist, secular humanist, there is no God. If you're a secular humanist, what about man? Evolution. Truth, it's all relative. Knowledge, that's how do we know things? It's epistemology, the study of knowledge, the theory of knowledge. How do you know something? Well, that's just naturalistic materialism. The universe is a closed entity and only materials matter. That means that the supernatural cannot matter. It's only the stuff that you can observe and touch and taste and measure. That's why science is so important. That's why prove to me this. That's why that is so important. It's a naturalistic materialism. And then lastly, the ethics, the right and wrong. Well, those are just cultural, or they're negotiated. What does your culture say is right and wrong? Or what you and I can negotiate to be right and wrong, and then we determine who amongst us are the people who decide what's negotiated. I don't really care about these guys. Me and these guys over here are going to say that this is what we believe to be true. This is what we believe to be right and wrong. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? We have different ways of looking at things because we build upon foundations of sand. Brings me to my next point. My age and people underneath me, people shouldn't say underneath, people younger than me, we learn with our eyes and we think with our feelings. We learn with our eyes and we think with our feelings. Everything's visual, nothing's mental. Nothing's rational, even though we believe we have a rational epistemology. We'll use really fancy words to say the law of non-contradiction and all these other logical sequences, but yet when it comes to it, we got to see it. So we learn with our eyes and we think with our feelings. Our feelings are what govern what we do. So if you understand this, if you get inside that 12-year-old Afghan kid's head and you recognize that he's looking at me, he's interpreting the world as, is this guy an Islamist or is he not an Islamist? It really is that simple. It really is broken down there. The world is oriented towards the visual, phones, social media. There's a guy named Simon Sinek. I mentioned this yesterday on Pat's show. There's 4 chemicals in the brain that Simon Sinek points to: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Endorphins, that's where you get your runner's high, that pushes you through the pain. Dopamine, that's goal achievement. That's whenever I'm playing a video game on my phone and it pings or dings or sends me a light or something. That flares something in my brain that rewards me chemically for accomplishing something. My accomplishments are algorithmically programmed to addict me to my device. That's visual. Serotonin, that's the leadership chemical. That's the chemical that says that I'm respected. I like feeling respected. I like people listening to me, right? If it's not checked, it creates a position where people want to be liked and respected and watched and listened to. Just like this, you could get addicted to this position because everyone is focused on me. Lastly, oxytocin. That's the feeling, the most powerful one, the feeling that you get when you're safe with the people that you love. Think about your spouse. Think about your kids. You got tornadoes outside, the doors are locked, and you're in your shelter. Chaos on the outside, but you feel safe. That's oxytocin. Indulgence is discernment. Passion equals conviction, and morality becomes uniformity. It's not about you believe what you believe, I'll believe what I believe. It's you must believe what I believe. And because my beliefs are based on my indulgence, Lord be with you, depending on how I feel at that time. The conclusion of this is that there are generations of millions with a fluid understanding of the most basic building blocks of existence. The only certainty is that there is no certainty, and they're not really certain about that. This is countered by Proverbs 3 that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. There's contrast here. Brings me to my fourth point. I hope I'm being fast enough for y'all. The core of socialism, and this is where we get into the meat, okay? All that was set up. Now let's get into the meat, okay? So we've got people who are brainwashed, propaganda, little kid. We've got minds with sand foundations. And so because of all that, we now have a generation, my generation, millennials and Generation Z, that learn with their eyes and think with their feelings. So how does that manifest in America? Here's the $1 million, gazillion dollar issue. The core of socialism in America is that it is sold to Americans on the idea of caring about other people. And this is vitally critical. Socialism tried it first had a chance in the 20th century. Socialism came here with Woodrow Wilson, Margaret Sanger, all those people tried to adopt socialism in America, and they failed. Why? Because they thought it and they brought it in under the element of an economic context. We're going to socialize everything to help people in the economy. The problem is with free markets, normal schmucks like you guys have too much buy-in into free markets. So you're not going to give up your own work. You're not going to give up your own sacrifice. You're not going to give up what you've worked for and you earn. You're not going to give that up voluntarily. So socialism died and it went away. Of course, it helped that there's guys named Nazis that, killed Jews and tried to fight the whole world. So socialism got a really bad rap from its branding perspective. But the economic socialism failed in America because of free market capitalism. And so it was dead in the water. But then it came back. And it came back with these guys from the Frankfurt School who are actually leaving Nazi Germany, as it was ironic. And they came here and they looked at everything. They looked at the prosperity and the freedom and the liberty, and they were just disgusted. They were disgusted. So they infiltrated Columbia's English department and they said, well, how can we bring Marxism, how can we bring socialism to America? So they did a little sidestep and they changed the orientation. It's no longer about economy. It's no longer about the economics. Now it's about the culture. Now it's about the oppressed versus the victim. Now it's about the poor, the sick, the disabled, the LGBTQ plus AAIP LMNOP. It's about those people. It's about minorities. It's about women, even though women are over 50% of the population. It's about people of color, even though every single person has color on their skin. It's about all these things, all these groups. It's about political identity politics. Where this gets its hooks in, where this establishes its effectiveness, is that it presupposes that people have value, that they have dignity, that there's a responsibility to restore and fulfill said value and said dignity if it's been lost or taken at the expense of the oppressor. The irony is that is a Judeo-Christian idea. It is a Judeo-Christian concept that all life has value, that people should have freedom of speech. The Law of Gleaning, go back, I want to say Ruth, check me on that. But the Law of Gleaning, where you harvest your fields and you leave the outsides. Well, you leave the outsides because you don't want to take too much and you want to leave the opportunity for other people. But other people got to come and they got to do the work. They got to come and actually do something with it. So the charity is built in there. But the presupposition that life has value is the orientation that this new wave of socialism capitalizes on. You think about that. Every single socialist program that is peddled by any Democrat or any leftist or any rhino Republican. Let's be straight. The wolves are in the hen house. So when people say that, thus and such, or, hey, government, it's not that bad a deal to help out. Medicare for all, that's good. We get to take care of people. What do they just say? Let's take care of people. It's no longer about what's the role of government. It's about corrupting the very heart of Christianity and weaponizing it for a political agenda. And that is why socialism is effective in my generation and other generations. And that is why conservatism, constitutionalism, limited government, free markets, national defense, all the other buzzwords, Second Amendment, all your other buzzwords that I said a lot whenever I was campaigning for office, they don't matter. They're hitting on 10 ears. Dink, dink. People do not have ears to hear because they have been so thoroughly corrupted by what it means to care for other people. Does that make sense? Because if this point doesn't make sense, then all of what I'm saying doesn't matter. It's like what Paul said, if Christ never rose from the grave, then it don't really matter. Okay? So right here, and I'm not liking this to Christ's resurrection, but if you cannot see how the very nature of Christianity has been hijacked by these people, then you miss everything that I'm talking about, and we will never beat socialism, because you can't beat socialism with, well, let's just create jobs. Rush Limbaugh, I'm a Rush baby, right? One of my first memories is my grandfather, who has since passed, laying on the ground with the pillow underneath his head, listening to that intro song. Boom, bum, ba-da-da-da. You know that one. I bring that up because I just lost my point. I took myself back there. My point for bringing that up is that whenever you communicate your values, you need to make sure that you're not speaking outside of the experience of your audience. And that's a rule from Saul Alinsky. When Saul Alinsky wrote his book, Rules for Radicals, not only did he dedicate it to Lucifer, the world's first successful radical, but he also had a couple of really good ideas, really good truths in there. And one of his truths was, do not speak outside of the experience of your audience. Because if you do, they're not going to hear. Today, when people communicate conservatism, pride in America, national defense, border security, free market capitalism, patient-centered healthcare, that is outside of the experience of people my age and younger. They are literally not ready to receive the wisdom that you're giving them. Does that make sense? That is like the whole of what I'm trying to get across today. I'll speed up because I want feedback. Oh, I gotta hit that. Love is the chief ethic. In Christianity, it's the chief ethic. God's called a lot of things. God is love. Amen. Amen. But when it's perverted, right? Satan's a liar. He'll tell 99% truth and 1% lie. 1% lie is all it's needed. He's not going to come with red pitchforks and tail and whatnot. Oh, come on. This is where I'm bad. But, Paul writes, he'll come dressed as an angel of light. And so will his other friends. They'll all come looking really slick and smiled and look at my teeth. They're perfect. And here's my picture perfect family, America, right? And you'll vote for them. You'll give them money. You'll call for them. You'll do all the things you do. It's discernment, right? But love is the chief ethic because there's no higher form of moral righteousness than love. Love is undefined today for my generation. It's amorphous. It can be whatever you want it to be. Versus in the Greek, you got four words for love. Agape, which is your unconditional. Storge, which is your protective, parental love. Phileo, which is your brotherly love. That's where we get Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. It's your friendship love. And then eros, which is, well, y'all are old enough, I think you know what that one means. But you've got 4 different types of love that have 4 different definitions in the Greek. We've got no such thing in English. Because of that, our palate is limited. Our ability to communicate what it means to love is non-existent, which, because you have a morality and a worldview built on sand foundations, can be whatever you want it to be. Because your morality can be whatever you want it to be, love is anything that is what you want. And because that is the chief ethic of Christianity, they have defanged the believers in this country. Because we don't know how to respond to that. We are flat-footed. We are absolutely flat-footed because they are using our language to their own advantage. That is a suicide bomber walking up to me in the middle of a crowded marketplace and hitting the button. They don't care about the people around them. They're just trying to achieve the effect that they sent themselves out to do. In the 21st century, its foothold, socialism's foothold, is reliant on love. It's warped the chief ethic of Christianity, love, and it uses it to command the conclusions. We will be socialist because that's the only way we can love people. That's the only way we can care for people, is if we love through government action.
Amen.
I disagree with that, but like that's what they do. Okay, I got to speed up because I want to preach, but I mostly want to preach. By point 5 is this is what I call, it creates free range prisons. You create free range chickens. They run around and they're healthier and they can do what they want. But a free range prison is one where you think that you're free, but you're really in a dummy jacket, straight laced, and you're isolated. It creates a position where you can't get out, you can't do anything, but yet you have believed the lie that you have self-autonomy, moral autonomy, and the freedom to do whatever you want. Okay? In 2 Corinthians 10, there's one word that's only used once in the entire scripture. It's where Paul talks about pulling down strongholds. That word strongholds is okurama. I'm not a Greek guy, but you all go look at it. But it's a castle, it's a fortress, it's a stronghold. It's anything which something relies upon. That means your presuppositions, your philosophies, your arguments, your reason, anything that you build your foundation on, that is your okurama, that is your stronghold. When we wage war as Christians, we wage war not with flesh weapons, but with supernatural, with powerful weapons to pull those strongholds down. So to use the imagery Paul's using is that the things that we're supposed to do when we have spiritual warfare is to tear down the prisons that are in people's minds. The ideologies and the philosophies that people have so imprisoned themselves in that though they believe they are free, they have necessarily limited what they do. And they believe they are free, but we know they are not free. So how do we pull them down? How do we, as the verse continues, how do we make every thought captive to Christ? How do we bring them into freedom? And that is what I want to talk about. Just now got there. This one's not that far. The first thing is pray. The prayer of the righteous availeth much.
Amen.
I'm reading a book called The Screwtape Letters. It's by C.S. Lewis. It's one of the hardest and awesomest books I've ever read. It's hard to read because if you don't know, it's written from the perspective of two demons that work for Satan trying to keep people out of heaven. And so they speak about their enemy, which is really God. So when the book says the enemy, they're talking about God. And so because I've been raised and I am a Christian, whenever I think enemy, I think Satan. So I've got to do this mental gymnastics to reinterpret what they're saying, but the truths are so pure. It is so powerful how C.S. Lewis' observations of how demons would look at us and how to separate us from the love of Christ. And the way that he does it is he says that whenever they pray, get them to pray to a thing, like this thing, an object. Get them to pray at something, not God. Get them to think that they're praying for someone, not because they care about that person, but because they're better than that person. And that person's not as good as us. And so they're using the very aspect of what we do against us, which I just think is brilliant. It's lethal and it's evil, but it's brilliant.
Jarrin, the screw tape letter is a senior demon,
Right,
and he's giving advice to his nephew
right,
demon,
right,
younger nephew.
right. And there's,
That's from the perspective of an older guy,
with experience, right,
younger demon.
right. Save questions and comments till the end. I'm already going long enough. But I mean, you're right. Screw tape is the uncle to wormwood. So yeah. Okay. So here's some practical steps, and this is the one that I think is. Here's where I'll bring my own, reason and experience. I think we have to rebrand conservatism to focus on love. We got to go straight for the heart of what socialism is using to infect this country. The method by which cancer infects the body is the thing that you've got to attack. If someone was doing room clearing, if there's a platoon of soldiers coming in here to wipe us all out, the first thing they're going to do is isolate. The second thing they're going to do is get the foothold in the door. Because once you get the foothold in the door, you can take your time. You don't have to go fast. You don't have to, it's on you. So whenever you rebrand as conservatism, when you rebrand conservatism to focus on love, recognize that our founders assumed the Judeo-Christian worldview to be true. The majority of them believed in the Bible. So because they believed in the Bible and they had that worldview, the output was the Constitution. It was the Declaration. It was the Federalist Papers. Even the Anti-Federalist Papers arguing against the Constitution was rooted in a Judeo-Christian worldview. So we had a bunch of Christians talk about how do we set up a government? And we got the government what we have, which is why we have the most brilliant political document in the history of the world, history of mankind. I'll be clear, it's not inspired. It's not on par with the Bible, but it makes sense that it follows the logic and the commands of the Bible. Just like common law. When British common law was adopted, what do? They looked to Deuteronomy. They established common law by looking back at the Old Testament. Today, this is where it's going to cut. Okay? I told you I was going to cut you. This is where I'm going to cut you. Okay? So this is your trigger warning, this is what us young people say. Okay? Your trigger warning, right? Today, we must assume that Judeo-Christianity, that we must assume the Judeo-Christian worldview is not governing this country. We must assume that it is in the minority. Even though there may be people who profess Christ, are they really going to go die to themselves daily? Are they going to carry their cross? Are they going to speak the gospel? Are they going to rebuke? Are they going to reprove? Are they going to train? Are they going to pray? Because see, I think we have a lot of culture Christians. We have a lot of people who say one thing and then do another. Now, you might look at me and say, well, Jarrin, this isn't really a political thing. Okay. But again, when our founders created America, to them, religion was assumed. Me and you could talk about the Bible and we both assumed it to be true. There was no variance. There was no disagreement. Today, we have members of Congress who are jihadists. We have members of Congress who believe in the Quran in Surah 9, which is the final revelation of Muhammad, which means it abrogates all the peaceful areas of the Medina verses, all the Meccan verses when Muhammad was going back to kill people and take over Mecca, and he had his revelations. Surah 9 is all about killing the infidel. Surah 9 is all about killing the non-believer. Surah 9 is all about striking into them until they find in you hardness. Strike at their neck. Attack the people of the book. So our book of Revelation that was authored by John that talks about, Jesus will come and it's 21 chapters and it says at the very end, don't take away a word or add to a word. Our Revelations talks about the apocalypse, right? Their revelation is Surah 9. And Surah 9 is the most violent and deadly verse. It's the most violent and deadly chapter in the Quran. So if you are a Muslim, you can have your freedom, you can have your religious freedom. Recognize that religious freedom is brought to you by a Judeo-Christian worldview. It's not brought to you by an Islamic worldview. And so whenever we speak about politics, I'm engaging people with foundations of sand, a fluid morality, and an epistemology that doesn't recognize that God can even exist. So my politics necessarily must become morality. It must become about my faith. And that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, look at it right now. The average age in here is not 33. Okay?
Looks like a senior citizen.
Your words, not mine. The average age in here is not people who do Snapchat, not people with a Twitter following, not people with a YouTube channel. So how do you talk to people who have all those things? Those are just very basic differences. How do you speak to people that age using the words that you know and the values that you have? You can't, and you will fail. That is my cut tonight. My cut tonight is that you will, and I'm on y'all's side. We will fail. That's why we have to retake love. They took the rainbow. They took love. They take caring. They take all these things that are basic precepts of the Judeo-Christian worldview, and they use them as arrows in their quiver. The very first thing that they do is they initiate fire with a bazooka that says, I care more than you do. And what's our response? Well, it's not constitutional because Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has to do this and this and this. Are you kidding me? You've lost the fight. You completely lost the language battle, but that's why you got to retake love. And here's where this gets good. Now some hope, because I'm going to take back hope, right? They took hope, and I've read The Audacity of Hope. Obama's a really smart guy. You might not like him. That guy's smart. He took hope. He took hope. We need to take it back. Here's my hope. We are speaking to people whose worldview has no moral clarity. We are speaking to people with no foundation. We are speaking to people who cannot reason without inconsistencies popping up. So all we have to do is just point it out. It's like they're in a pool holding down this beach ball, and they've got to struggle to keep it underwater, all while denying that there's a beach ball underwater. Well, there's a couple things. They're going to be straining to keep that beach ball underwater, all while touching the beach ball that's underwater. Our job is just to poke their arms. Just poke their arms and make it pop up. My generation is more suicidal. It's more depressed. It's more stressed. It's more isolated. It's more of a product of a broken home. They don't understand family. They don't understand love. They don't understand forgiveness. They don't understand what tolerance really means. They don't understand empathy. They think they do, but they don't. And this is why love is such a critical idea that hits straight to the heart of what socialism is trying to take from us. Because socialism is lying when it says that it's doing these things. It's a lie. It's obviously a lie, which is why this is so easy for us to take it back. Where that's hard is that you have to check your anger. You've got to make sure that you don't get mad. You actually have to love them, is what I'm saying. You actually have to do the hard work and love people. And that's going to raise eyebrows. Last night, and I'll wrap up. Last night, I have a Facebook page, Jarrin Jackson. I was talking, I posted a meme about Jews. I said, here's 6 things you don't see Jews doing. And it was, you don't see Jews beheading people. You don't see Jews trying to dominate the world. You don't see Jews trying to, take over the world and all these other things. And I got so much hate. It's the most viral thing my Facebook page has ever posted. 2,500 plus shares. I mean, it just blew up. A lot of support, but a lot of hate. And I believe in redemption, so I do not ever want to give up on someone until they've just proven to me that I should dust off my sandals and walk away. I was engaging an atheist. His name, you guys can figure out. I was engaging an atheist who started with the language with an F word. I won't say it, but he started with an F word, right? Over the course of an hour, and this is all online, this is not face-to-face, he didn't hear my voice, it's time delayed because I'll write something and then he'll write something, so it wasn't a conversation, but it was a conversation deep in the bowels of the internet. And an hour and a half into this, He says, you are arguably the nicest person I've ever argued with, and I'm actually reconsidering. I really want to believe in God. And I texted my brother, I told him about it, and I prayed. And I messaged him. So it was all in public, but I messaged him and took it private. And when I took it private, I said, don't let me, as a hypocrite, as a sinful, horrible person who lusts, who lies, who cheats, who steals, don't let me get in the way of this almighty God, because I'm horrible. Don't use me as the standard. Understand that I'm a hypocrite, and so is every other Christian. Church is a great place for hypocrites. It's where they're supposed to go, right? So as I'm saying this to him, not 5 minutes later, it's as though the devil just snatches his heart, and he just slams into me with the tirade of, I just remembered how this conversation started. F you, he just kept going into it. And I was just like that. Just like that. He obviously cares. He obviously is struggling, but it's not my job to win him over. And that's something I've learned. That's something that's taken away the frustration. It's not my job to win this fight. It's just my job to fight. And that's the last thing I'll say, is that the way that we defeat, the way that we kill socialism in 21st century America is you have to love people. But you got to do it for real. You can't fake it. And we can do that. It's obvious that it works. But you got to remember, it's not your job to win. It's your job to fight. My name is Jarrin Jackson, and I love America.
We're going to start with question
That was a
and
lot
answer.
longer than I thought it would be.
You did great.
Sorry. I'll cut it down.
Really appreciate what you're saying. It's helping me to understand the battle we're in and why we're not winning it at this time. My question, right? I got a lot of questions, but I'll limit it to one. The socialist people are promising, they're equating love with giving people this, giving people that, free education, free health care, free this, free that, no more headaches or hangnails. Everything's going to be wonderful and it won't cost you a dime. How on earth do you and they look at that as being loving toward these people. The people they're reaching look at it as being loved. How in the world do you conquer that in a capitalist system? We've got the best product. We offer them the best things, but I don't know how you compete with it.
That's a great question. And I've used the word cut a couple times. Let me cut, okay? Because I think that's how we learn. Your question is loaded with so much conservatism that it's evident that there's other parts of conservatism that you haven't. There's other conservative muscles that aren't exercised. And I am too, because let me put this another way. If I accept your premise, then I've lost the debate. When Democrats are talking, or leftists or whomever are talking about, free this, free that, free this, free that, they're presupposing the role of government. They're saying the government should be involved in this, so let's go do stuff. If conservatives politically engage at that level, we've lost. How can you beat Santa Claus? You can't. You can't beat Santa Claus. So think about what the value of those things actually are, and then speak to the moral origin of what healthcare and homes and money, what do those things do for people? What are the holes that they fill in people's hearts? Where Democrats fail is they're using a fallible man-made agent of action to achieve that which only God can. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go Bible thump everybody and say that. Just speak to that person and say something to the effect of, I know that you are struggling. I know that you don't have everything lined up. I know that the world has dealt you a bad hand. I know that you feel very passionately about this situation. You can change the world by pouring yourself into this. One of the things that my generation does not know or value is work, is responsibility. And that may seem really ironic to you, but we are craving it. Why are we craving it? Because we want to change the world, right? But we don't know how to do that. So whenever conservatives are talking to people my age about stuff, about policies, whenever you're speaking at the policy level, you're assuming that they understand the things the way that you understand them, but they don't. That's why you've got to go back to those foundations. What's the foundation that he's relying on or she's standing on? Let me poke at that. And you can ask a policy question, or someone else can ask a policy question. But what would it sound like if conservatives started saying, well, I love people and I want them to understand that there's fulfillment in working to make themselves better, honing their constitution, improving their skills so that they can help and love other people?
Okay, that's a good example.
How's that for a, Yeah, and whenever I say conservatives have to take back love, I mean use the word. Use the word. They use it all over the place. They wave it and will love Trump's hate. I don't know what that means, but just say, I love you and I care for you. When you're talking, and I love Jesus, okay? So when you're talking to someone about the gospel and you tell them that they're a sinner and they need Christ, one of the methods that I use is say, I love you and care for you so much that I don't want this to happen to you. And because I care about you, I want you to know this. And that disarms a lot of people, because here's the secret. They were made by God. So they're going to mirror their creator. They're going to respect. They're going to empathize. They're going to like being valued and cherished. So whenever you value and cherish someone by showing them that you actually love them, wait, this guy's not a complete jerk. He's not a white supremacist who's for millionaires and billionaires. Yep. You actually said you love me. It's powerful. But it cuts both ways, because you got to live up to it. It can't be, it's got to be sincere. If it becomes a talking point like tax cuts or border security, then we're toast.
Let me just add on, because I am also 33 and I deal with this a lot too. It's awesome. You're in my head right now. It's not just about saying love, and you've kind of touched on it here and there, but I really want to bring it out to you guys. It's about showing love in action. It's the definition of a good leader, somebody who walks the walk and talks the talk. At the same time, it's proving to them and redefining what love actually is. Right. Love is spanking your kids when they do the wrong thing, because you don't want them to grow up thinking that they can get away with that once they turn 18 and they can be thrown into jail. That's love, is doing things that aren't always fun, working to provide for your family, self-worth. That's part of a foundation.
Right.
Showing love by helping people out, going out of your way to do something for them, not just necessarily telling them that, but that helps for sure. But that has been something that has helped me a lot, and reminding them that if we all throw our money in a big pot and then redistribute it to everybody, what happens to the American dream?
Yeah.
That's what we want for our kids, and that usually is the poke they need on the on the beach ball to get them going, wait a second, you're absolutely right.
Let me try to, thank you, you've helped form this thought. Let me try to present it this way. Think like an insurgent. How do I hit the stronger target? When my enemy would come up to me, they wouldn't stand toe to toe against me. Those were good days. That's one shot, one kill. Those were good days for us, but they were very rare because our enemy wasn't that stupid. what you're trying to do is you're trying to create cognitive dissonance. You're trying to rattle their heads and get in their heads and just jumble around like a bull in a china shop. Create chaos because they're not grounded, and I'm assuming a lot here. I'm not to say that they won't speak clearly and they can't articulate their beliefs and all these things. I'm saying that because their worldview has inconsistencies, you say things to create them to say, wait, that doesn't compute. It's like, forgive me, the only thing I can think of is Star Wars Episode 1 when he goes, I'm going to Coruscant, and the droid goes, whoa, that doesn't compute. I'm going to you're under arrest. Like he couldn't think through, and that's all we're trying to do. All we're trying to do is to show that we're human, we care about them, and there's actually applications to our ideas. And here's the other thing, is you may have already had, because I'm sensing some with this. Love has already been cultured in your head to be a liberal word. It's already been redefined. If you put it this way, if you have resistance to what I'm saying, it's because you have bought the definition that other people are using. What I'm saying is to reaffirm and reassert a different biblical American version of what love is. Why do you spank your kids? Because you love them. You want them to make good decisions when they're older. You want them to know that the teaching that you give them is not just because you want them to do what you want them to do, but because as you teach them the right way, they won't depart from it, and there's value in understanding that your life and decisions have consequences. That right there is an example of how things go. And there's no one more qualified to do that than my folks here in this room. Yes, sir.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, sorry.
Wait.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be the one calling on people.
Okay.
And Rhonda, I'll be here as long as you'll have me. So,
Well, the object of our affective education of the last few decades has been to teach people to make emotional knee-jerk responses to images and words, and so that they do not have to process truth and facts into a reasoned decision to make the important decisions that they need to make. And so we need to take advantage. You mentioned Saul Alinsky's strategy of you can't come from totally out of the context of people's experience or how they've been taught to process, and so they have been, today's young socialists have been taught to they have an aversion to hypocrisy. The old men that gave us America, the Christian, the church, the Bible, we're all hypocrites. Okay, so they've been taught to hate hypocrisy. So I've had the idea that maybe we should use history with a lot of imagery, because they are visual. Use the true history of socialism of the 20th century with a lot of imagery, and show them how hypocritical socialism is, how its history, how the claims that the leaders of American Democrat socialists, how hypocritical their claims for socialism are compared with how it lines up with the true history of socialism. We need to flood the internet with images of women tied to turnstiles running grist mills in the Soviet Union, and people thrown across the threshold of their family's front door in Bulgaria, 1950s and 60s, with bullets through their head for running underground churches, and people in political prisons. The true history of socialism. I don't see much images of that in the world.
I get your point. I completely disagree with you, and here's why. People are arrogant, and they usually make the mistake that history begins when they were born. So history began in 1985. Everything before 1985, you all are just old, and I can't see any of you guys at 21 years old. So, but see, now you're attributing to people who are smart the fact that they really will interpret that, and that will decide that will determine their decision.
I don't conclude that all young people are stupid.
And neither am I. What I'm saying is that it's talking about how do you get a message across. And whenever I agree with you, so one of the points I did not say, because I thought I was really long on time, was I'm calling it jihadi jujitsu. So one of the things that jihadis do is they put bombs on themselves or kids or whatever, and they go blow themselves up. You brought up the element of hypocrisy. I completely agree with you. I want to affirm that that is a shrewd way of analyzing, I call it a ball bearings analysis. In World War II, bombers, we had a lot of bombers and we wanted to bomb Nazi Germany. How do we defeat the war machine? Some pencil pusher guru guy said that, well, if we bomb the ball bearings factories, ball bearings are in tanks and planes and rockets and all this stuff. So they bombed ball bearings factories, right? So I agree with you. I think that's a very shrewd analysis. Let me go one step further, and here's how you would apply it. So instead of saying, here's what socialism has done, just say, I'm a hypocrite. I'm absolutely a hypocrite. I don't do and live up to the standards that I want to. But I have a worldview that says that this is the standard, and here's why I believe it. It takes your pride completely out of it. And that is an asymmetric response to a very pride-motivated world.
They already believe you're a hypocrite.
But you don't say it.
You're not changing their mind.
But you don't. Again, I'm not going to change their minds. I'm just trying to poke their arms. That's where I will say that that's the wrong objective. Because I want everyone to believe in Jesus, but I can't do that. I can't do that. The Bible says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Who knows if he's hardening the heart and you're just beating your head up against the wall? My point is, use what you can control. If people are going to look to me and say, well, you're a white supremacist and you were born into this and you're only a Christian because you were born in America and you've benefited off the backs of slaves from 100 years, whatever. Yeah, I'm a hypocrite. I don't do the things that I want to do. What's Romans, the things I do not do. I do the things I don't want to do. And the reason why I come to this, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think it is a shrewd comment, but I just know that if you showed me pictures of 1960s Venezuela or wherever, people still aren't linking Obamacare to Obama. They're still not linking socialist policies today to bad outcomes. They won't link the Trump economy to Donald Trump. They'll say, well, that's Obama. And to be frank, to push further, because they believe their own channels, their own authoritative channels, I can't even think of people on their side, but the media on their side, all the media on their side has to do is, well, this is because of this. And then now they've got their talking point. How do you disrupt the talking point? In the military, we would say, get left of the boom, right? If you look at a timeline, as you're looking at it, this is left, this is right, this is hard for me. This is left, this is right. Timeline, bomb blows up. Everything after bomb blows up, it's already detonated. So if this is where the boom goes, get left of the boom. Get over here. And the way to do that, whenever you engage, just take your pride out of it and say, yeah, I'm a sinner, I fall short. And that does a couple things. It does exactly what we're commanded to do, which is remove ourselves from the situation. It's not about me. It's not about me changing their minds. It's not about me winning stuff for America. It's not about me passing this. It's completely removing me. And here's the kicker. What are they going to do after you've already told them that you're a hypocrite? You've already taken their trump card away from them. That's the cudgel that they're used to smashing us on the head with. Let me just take that weapon from you, bro. Now let's talk about some stuff. Let's talk about reason. Let's talk about, what it means to have a morality and not be able to live up to it. Do you ever make mistakes? Have you ever regretted saying something or doing something to people you care about? Because that's the discussion. That's the community. That's another word we need to take back. That's the community I want. I want a community where people are readily admitting their mistakes and able to interact because of it. I do think you have a shrewd way of looking at it, though.
Okay, several things. I've read several articles lately, and they're saying that when millennials, when the Republicans push this anti-socialism platform, it falls dead with millennials, totally dead. And remember, socialism is always popular because they're going to do it right this time, right? Okay. My comment to you, really, the heart of what I want to say is, what we're truly lacking, and I have millennial grandkids, I have a millennial son, And all the people in this room have kids and grandkids that they need to start talking to. But the one thing we're lacking in all this, and we haven't mentioned it, is honesty. Okay? We need to be honest with our grandchildren. We need to tell them that Social Security was the most egregious Ponzi scheme ever perpetrated on people in the history of the United States. If the people in the U.S. Congress, since the institution of Social Security began, if all those members of Congress that voted all those provisions and then blew the money, okay, on God knows what, they should be in jail next to Bernie Madoff. Okay? It is a Ponzi scheme. It's all it is, and they're facing the brunt of it. We have so abused the millennial generation. We have heaped debt on them, astronomical debt. They are burdened with keeping up with Social Security and all these programs. And Social Security, let's talk about it in another way. Not only is it a Ponzi scheme robbing a later generation to pay for the older generation, but it also breeds false notions. When I was 25 or 30, if I was really serious about thinking, well, you know, Social Security, if I was told Social Security was no longer going to exist, I would probably be a lot thriftier with my money. I would save more. I'd be more careful about the things that I spent my money on. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, and we need to be honest that since George H.W. Bush, every president, Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter, they have repeatedly made trade agreements with foreign countries that kill the American middle class and enrich the super wealthy and the transnational corporations. We have to start being honest with them and say, we have made these mistakes. This is going to hurt you.
I agree. I want to add to your repertoire, and I probably should have approached it like this, sir. I want to add to your conservative quiver. So that is a policy-driven approach, right? That presumes that I care about those policies. It also assumes that I understand money. It also assumes that I care about 40 years from now. What I'm trying to speak to is that the people that we care about, my generation, your kids, your grandkids, do they have the mind to receive that conversation? Because I would argue not many of them do. Not many of them do, because whenever and I don't know how you would do this. I don't know how you specifically would broach this conversation. But if I were, and let me try to be in your position. If I were in your position, I would say, here's where I've made a mistake. Bring in that humility, bring in that honesty, bring in that confession. And I really think that's how you get your foot in the door. I really think the way that you get your foot in the door is that most of the lies that people believe now is that we're white supremacists and we're racists and we've earned, or we have what we have because we got it from black people and all these other things. We've cheated them. Okay? Remember, socialism's notion of caring is that other people are being victimized. And that if you try to bring wisdom, or if you try to tell me something, well, this woman's benefited from the system, so who is she to tell me? And so it's almost as though you've got to show your credentials at the door. So where the identity, and this is probably a better way to put it. And I'm feeling these ideas out, so if I'm rough and not articulate on them, this is the very first time this is the very first time any of this has been outside my head. They think in terms of identity politics. So whenever they see you, they're going to stack you up where you're at on their hierarchy of victimhood. If you're a gay Jewish black dude, then you've got a lot of you've got a lot of social justice clout, and you can basically do whatever. If you're a WASP, if you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, I don't care what you say, because it doesn't matter what you say. And so it's almost as though you've got to understand that the way that they see you is through the lens of identity politics. So in order to disrupt that frame or to dismiss it so that you can actually speak to them, you've almost got to speak to that. Where you see this happening in celebrities or cultures is you'll have the mea culpa. I am so sorry that I used that word, and that's not how I feel, and that's not how I didn't mean to say that, and I didn't mean to offend. You have these people groveling and apologizing. I'm not suggesting we do that, not at all. I'm not suggesting that you, by any stretch of the word, tear yourself down for their own satisfaction. I'm saying that you just matter-of-factly say, I've made mistakes, and if you don't want to continue your life of isolation, suicide, depression, high stress, I know that you want something better for your life. Here's what I would do, because this is what maximizes that opportunity for you.
How about asking them how much are they willing to pay for a certain idea?
Again, you're assuming they understand the value of money and the time value of money, which, I guess my thesis tonight is to speak to the heart of the person. Instead of getting lost in all the headlines and all the policies, whenever you gauge a person, knowingly engage someone who probably has a lot of competing worldviews. And so whenever they say things, do they really understand it? Do they really believe it? Because if not, they can just call a Peyton Manning audible and say something else the next time. You see this clearly on the abortion debate. Where does life start? Well, it starts at conception. That's life. Well, but what about a woman's choice? Well, are we talking about the value of life? Are we talking about a woman's choice? Are we talking about the statistics of, pregnancies of convenience, or abortions of convenience? Like, where are we at? And that's where you see this sliding scale where people just kind of throw out all sorts of stuff. It's because they're not grounded anywhere. And I guess that's my point. I don't know if I'm being clear, but that's my point.
Hey, Jarrin,
Sorry.
That's okay.
I have to divert him.
Jarrin, I have a question, and I don't know if you've given much thought about it, but most of what you've talked about tonight seems to be about personal things, talking to people personally. And if you haven't given this thought, that's okay. I know you will. Our whole society has been taken over by, I'm going to call them progressives. I mean, they control the culture, they control entertainment, the movies, TV, sports shows are now very politically left, but also culturally left. Where I work, almost all of my colleagues are progressives or neo-Marxists, and they're very influential where I work with young people. And how do we combat that?
I have thought about that. What I've brought today is so in the military, there's the strategic level, the operational level, and then the tactical level. Strategic level is the generals looking at the board saying, we're going to invade Europe first. That's Churchill's, the soft underbelly of the Axis, right? Italy. The operational is, how do you get the beans to the front lines? How do you get the bullets to the front lines? The operational maneuvers. And then the tactical is the, anything within the sound of the bomb. Anything within the sound of the gunshot is by definition tactics. What I've talked about is tactics. I've talked tonight about the tactical level. The strategic level, which is where I would say that you're more aiming at, because that's really about how do you fight it. You got to kind of meet in the middle, but I would still go to the element that is the most contentious and combative idea ever, Jesus. I would take it to the cross. You go into a brood of vipers and you say that name anywhere, it's going to pop up. And people are going to label you a nut, and people are going to label you that you don't know anything. But again, I don't think that you can change these people's minds. You either put a bullet in their head or you treat them the way that you're supposed to be treating them. I caught a guy, caught a jihadi. He had killed 22 Americans within a year and a half whenever we got there. This guy was radicalized. He was a facilitator. He's a legit bad guy. We caught him and sent him back for, because we sent him back to prison. The rule of the day was that if the village elders came and vouched for him, then they would release him. Doesn't matter what he'd done. If the elders were willing to vouch for somebody who had done whatever, then they'd release him, and they did. And the 3 weeks he was off the streets, quiet, ghost town. He came back when they were released. It was, full-scale war. I learned that if I could have gone back in time, it would have been more beneficial for me to just put a bullet in his head. And I wish I had, because there was people who got killed and hurt afterwards. And that's really the way that I approach these things. Unless we're ready to start doing business, and unless we're really ready to doing stuff, that's not an option I want to entertain. I mean, the preamble of the Constitution says to form a more perfect union. How do you form a more perfect union? That phrase was written by people that all assumed a same morality. We don't have a same morality. So when we talk about Social Security or defense or anything else, we're all acting like we have the same definition, but we don't. And what I'm trying to get at is, let's just identify the one thing we don't agree on, which is everything. So how do you unify that? I don't think that you can. Is that a policy approach? I don't know, but choose your fights. Choose the pick and choose. Do you want to take them off one by one, or do you just want to step into the arena and open up?
Like I was just on a hiring committee, and we hired an openly. She was a very proud Marxist. I asked her in the interview. I asked her who her favorite person in history was, and she said Huey Long, and it kind of took me back. I said, "Why Huey Long?" And her answer was real simple. She said, "Because he's the closest to Bernie Sanders." Right. She got hired. I argued against her and argued against her. The vote was 4-2. I could only convince one person. If I'd have used Jesus' name in that interview, I would have been kicked off that hiring committee. I really would have. I would have been said, "No, you can't talk about it."
I agree.
By the way, I work at Tulsa Community College.
I own and operate 2 franchise restaurants in Owasso. And whenever I'm working, I'll ask people how they're doing, because they're customers. How you doing? And doing well. Sometimes, from time to time, they'll ask me, "Well, how are you doing?" And I will say, "Better than I deserve," which is a phrase I stole from Dave Ramsey, shamelessly, because I think it's smart. So I'll say, "Better than I deserve." And from time to time, I'll get people go, "What do you mean?" And then I get to tell them the gospel. I completely understand, because I've got my life savings in those stores. I've got everything tied up in that. And that's where we're at. One of the very last sentences of the Declaration, they pledge their fortunes, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We're there. And I think that's probably one of the ways to speak to this crowd is, if we want to talk the Constitution, if we want to talk the Declaration, if we want to talk what it means to be America, you got to understand where the ideas come from. And you either believe this stuff or you don't. And this is where you separate the wheat from the chaff. This is where you separate the sheep and the goats. This is where you meet your mettle. And I'm not calling you out saying that you don't do that and you should do that, but that's where I'm saying that I want a community where that's part of the discussion. Because if enough of us actually insert that name, they can't kick us all out everywhere. They can't just boot us out wholesale. I mean, they're silencing people on social media platforms. What's the recourse? What do you do? I see a lot of people complaining about it. What's that getting them? Yeah. It's just making more people mad. That's just making more people mad. And this is rabbit hole, and I don't want to lose people. One of my hobbies is apologetics. One of my hobbies is the defense of the faith. I love to give evidence for the faith. And I am a presuppositionalist, which means that I don't want to give someone evidence who they themselves don't believe that there's the supernatural. Why would you ever talk to someone about the resurrection if they don't believe that supernatural stuff exists? So what I'll do is I'll talk about their presuppositions. Where do they get reason from? Where do they get logic from? Where do they get the rationale to hold the beliefs to be true that they hold to be true? My point in saying this is that whenever you bring up countervailing ideas that just create a splash, maybe that's all it's needed. Sometimes the best way to clear a room is just to lob a grenade in it. You know? And if that's your jihadi moment, then go down in a blaze of glory. But I guess my point in all of this is I am trying to approach the political situation that I see happening. And I think Trump has the momentum. I think he's got the initiative. I think he's going to walk into a 2020 reelection without a hitch. I think it's going to be... I don't think that he'll have much trouble, because right now, a good part of the voting population have y'all's values. Y'all are quiet. You're not going to make noise. You're not rabble rousers. You'll just quietly go vote, right? Well, but you're not going to like dye your hair and
No tattoos.
So my point is not to take away the energies and the actions of people here. My point is that compared to the most hostile liberals and the most hostile progressives, we as conservatives are usually reserved. But we will go do our due diligence and vote, and Trump will walk into complete re-election. My fear is that the ideas that are going to win in 2020 are not being communicated to receive an audience from the people who are right now forming their worldviews, such that 30 years from now, when these worldviews have been formed and you can't pierce them, because we all know once you hit 45, you ain't learning anything new, okay? You've done.
That's not true.
It's a joke. Come on, it's a joke. I don't know. But my point is that whenever that happens, you know, people who are my age 30 years from now will be set in their ways, and they won't want to entertain new things. And if conservatives don't think about how to take back the territory that's been lost, how do they anticipate to win over people who are conservatives? They're functional conservatives. They don't spend money that they don't have on stuff that they don't want because people tells them that they have to. There are people like that. They exist. But yet they'll go vote Democrat because that's what they think they have to do. Those are the people I'm going for.
Okay, let's take Bill.
Sorry.
And that's okay. Just
I love this stuff.
just shorten your
I don't do
answers.
that. This is
Bill,
Pat, this is Pat doing this to me.
Betty, and then I'm going to wrap it up, and you can stay and
Okay.
visit with whoever wants to visit. How's that? Okay, go, Bill.
Is it a good, legitimate question to a millennial adult about the age 30 to ask them, what is your foundation? And I'm saying sincerely to try to learn what they're thinking and start dialogue there. What is your foundation?
Yes, I like that because it gets them talking. One of the questions that, so there's a good book, it's called Tactics. It's by a guy named Greg Koukl, Koukl. He's a Christian apologist. He asks 3 questions. Remember the show Columbo? Well, you know, maybe just one more question, right? That guy? He'll ask the questions. What do you mean by that? Mm-hmm. How did you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered, and then offer an alternative? And what those do, it gets that person talking. The beauty of that strategy is because it jujitsus their pride, and you become the person that's like, you tell me what you think. If you can't tell, millennials will talk if they're asked questions. So ask them questions that puts the ball in their corner. How did you come to that conclusion? Or what did I say? What do you mean by that? So I believe in a woman's choice. What do you mean by that? Well, blah, 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 blah. How did you come to that conclusion? And then what that does is because they're holding down that beach ball, those are questions that offset the arms and start to cause the tension, because they will recognize, man, I'm full of it and I don't really know. So.
I would like to add to that. I have a daughter. Well, you guys, I have a bunch of daughters, but I have a 24-year-old daughter that is a teacher that once she went to college became an atheist and a liberal. Because when I asked her if she voted on election day, I said, well, did you vote for Ted Cruz? And she's like, no, I can't vote for Ted Cruz. I said, well, why can't you vote for Ted Cruz? She says, well, I'm a Democrat. And I was floored, okay? But I never stopped having conversations. So when certain things would come up, just like you said, Jarrin, I'd say, well, do you remember about this? Well, what about that? Or we kept the conversation, and I never demeaned her or thought her ideas were stupid. And about 6 months ago, I got a phone call, and she said, Mom, I just want you to know you were right about everything. And she's in church. She's not an atheist. She's a firm believer. She's still teaching school, but it's true. And it's keeping those lines of communications open, not degrading them, and asking questions, because they want to tell you what they know or what they think. Mm-hmm. But we can't say, well, that's a dumb idea. Mm-hmm. You just say, well, okay, but what about this? And then you present them with another scenario. And just leave it at that, because they go home and they think about it. And eventually it turns over. And then pray, because prayer is what did it, So I'm going to let Betty ask one more question, then we're going to shut her down.
Well, I really appreciate what she said, because this is so true about what education is doing to our nation, and that's what you were talking about. Well, here's one. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But the fool says in his heart, there's no God. And a system of education says no God is a fool's education. You go through Proverbs, just even Proverbs. You read what it says about fools. They despise wisdom and knowledge. They're right in their own eyes. And it's over and over. If we don't change the public schools, that says there's no God, it's only going to get worse. So we need to do whatever we can to change that. I mean, we're still the majority.
Yeah, well, so the way that I see it, and this is a political answer for those political junkies, the way that I see it is separation of church and state does not mean that religion shouldn't be involved in any public square or in anything for that matter. Separation of church and state is that the sword, the government, can't tell people what to do in their faith. The freedom of religion separates that. And the reason why, and our founders called the freedom of religion the first freedom. Why? Freedom of religion is freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience is really what determines what you do, what you think, what you say, which is why freedom of speech is closely associated with freedom of religion. I think I can't think of the Supreme, but it was 62 or 64. It was before 1985, okay? So the Supreme Court ruling that took prayer out of schools, I think should be challenged. Absolutely, I do. Which is why groups like this, in my humble opinion, and again, I'm not a candidate, y'all should be asking those tough questions. Come with questions like that and ask someone, would you be willing to pass legislation that challenges unconstitutional court rulings? And if if they hem and haw, out, gone, don't vote for that person. That's an indicator. It's like, so I think in terms of military, if we saw anybody walking around with an RPG on their shoulder, light them up. I don't have to ask. Dead. You carry around an RPG, I'm going to engage you. Because you don't just chill with an RPG. You do some damage with that thing. And so if you have a question, if you have something like that, bring that to the front. And if you get a politician that's like, well, we don't want to challenge, we can't litigate, it'll take a lot of time. I don't care. Kick in the doors, go for it.
Do what's right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the way that I would say, and the idea I want to push back on is the one person, the one atheist or the one Muslim that says, well, I don't believe in a Christian God. Cool. Go over there. Mm-hmm. Go over there and pray. Go over there and not participate.
Amen.
You have the freedom of non-religion just as I have the freedom of religion. Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
And I agree with you. I agree with you.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. It's 8:30. We usually try and wrap it up at 8, but this has been a very good talk and very interesting, and we thank you.